If you're lucky enough to have an assistant, then, you might have an assistant who is paid, or you might have a volunteer assistant. And so you want to keep in mind, again, the differences between them. There's nothing right or wrong with either of them, but you just want to be sure that you're rewarding them, especially volunteers. You want to give them enough reinforcement to keep on with you. So paid assistants here in Ontario, they're employees. So we have to give them a minimum of 3 hours work for every shift. They do get sick and personal days. They get a minimum of 2 that are paid per year. They get vacation pay, so 4% and up. They are covered by our insurance policy. They do have a contract that they sign with us. And you might want to work with them on whatever goals they might have. So you might say to them when they come on board, what are your goals? Are you hoping to become a trainer, in a year, 2 years? Are you in a program like Jean Donaldson or Caryn Pryor? How can I help you get to that level? And then if you have volunteer hours, or volunteer assistants, you might have the same questions. And the one thing to watch for is, of course, paid or volunteer, people are going to come in and they're going to take all the knowledge they can possibly take, and they might move on. There's nothing we can do about that. And what I think is, protect yourself as best as you can. But at the same time, the more trainers that we have out there that are knowledgeable and skilled, the better it is. So don't be too worried about this. There are plenty of people out there who want the hours. So you might give a volunteer a minimum number of hours. It doesn't necessarily, there's no real minimum out there here anyways. Nicole asks, can the contractor fall under the company's insurance? They can. Well, it would depend. Let me rephrase that. They might not. So it really depends on your insurance. I know that my insurance covers my contractors, but I actually still require them to have their own general liability because they are contractors. And so depending on what happens, depending on who the responsibility falls on, is whose insurance would take over. So yeah, it's a bit of a tough one. When it comes to assistants, if they're paid, they're under our insurance, of course, because they're an employee. And then, of course, with volunteers, they have to be under our insurance. And that's a really important one because with volunteers, we're even more liable, I think, sometimes. So you might have a policy in place for volunteers that says you have to work X number of hours a week in order to stay on with us. And if you cancel more than 3 times in a year or whatever it is, then we're going to let you go, because we do rely on our volunteers really quite heavily. Of course, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing them, rewarding them. They're part of the team. Just because they're not paid doesn't mean that they're any less important than anyone else. We do want a really clear contract that's very similar to the paid one and help them achieve their goals as well. These are people who are coming in and they're helping and they're learning, and the more we can teach them and support them, then we might be able to have them as trainers on our staff one day. And isn't that kind of the goal for all of us, is to have a great team?